Rain hammered Blackwood Ranch when Clara reached the barn with blood on her sleeve and her feverish son in her arms. 3 riders were closing in behind her. Elias opened the door, lantern raised, as she pressed a sealed letter into his hand. "Please don't send us back." A rifle cracked beyond the gate. Elias looked down at the black wax seal and felt the night turn colder again. It belonged to his father, dead for 10 years. 3 months earlier, Clara Whitmore had stood beside her husband's grave, while the first cold wind of autumn moved through Mercy Creek. Daniel's death had been called an accident. His horse had thrown him on a narrow mountain road, and no one had questioned why an experienced rider had been found so far from the... Clara remembered only the fear in his face during his final week, and the way he had checked the road each night before locking the door. Before the burial dirt had settled, Daniel's older brother took control of everything. Silas Whitmore arrived at the house with a lawyer, 2 hired men, and a stack of papers Clara had never seen. He claimed Daniel had left debts large enough to consume the home, the horses, the savings, and every acre connected to the Whitmore name. When Clara asked to examine the accounts, Silas treated the request as proof that grief had confused. He told the lawyer that women understood kitchens and children, not contracts or land. Clara did not argue about his insult. She asked for the original notes bearing Daniel's signature. Silas refused. That was when she understood the debts were not the only thing he was hiding. Daniel had given Clara a folded deed 2 nights before his final ride. He had told her to keep it close, trust no member of his family, and protect Samuel's name until she could reach Blackwood Ranch. He had promised to explain everything when he returned. He never did. When Silas searched the house and failed to find the deed, his grief disappeared. He accused Clara of stealing family property. By evening, the story had spread through Mercy Creek. The widow had forged papers. The widow had trapped Daniel into marriage. The widow had driven him toward an early grave and now meant to rob his blood relative. Silas had donated money to the church roof, financed 2 stores, and shared meals with the bank manager. Clara had only a black dress, a frightened child, and questions no one wished to hear. The following morning, she and Sam were ordered out. Clara did not beg for the house. She did not ask for Daniel's money or the silver that had belonged to his mother. She asked only for Sam's winter coat. One of Silas's men closed the door before she could retrieve it. An elderly cook who had served Daniel since childhood found Clara behind the stable. She brought an old valise, bread wrapped in cloth, and a sealed envelope Daniel had hidden beneath a loose floorboard. The black wax carried a mark Clara did not recognize. The cook knew only that Daniel had spoken the name Elias Blackwood shortly before his death. Clara left before Silas realized the envelope was missing. She traded her wedding ring for food and a seat on a freight wagon heading west. Sam slept against her side while she watched every rider behind them. Near Mercy Creek, she recognized one of Silas's hired men at a roadside station. Clara stepped down before dawn, carried her son into the hills, and followed the fence lines rather than the road. By the second night, Sam had developed a fever. Rain soaked through Clara's dress. Thorns opened the skin along her wrist as she crossed a broken fence, leaving the blood Elias later saw on her sleeve. Still, she kept walking because stopping meant allowing Silas to decide her son's future. Now, inside the kitchen at Blackwood Ranch, Sam lay near the stove beneath 2 heavy blankets. Elias placed water within Clara's reach and asked for nothing in return. He did not demand her history while her hands were still shaking. He did not look at her torn dress as though poverty were a crime. Clara offered to cook, clean stalls, mend tack, or work in the fields. She asked for no charity and made no promise she could not keep. All she wanted was one safe night and enough warmth to bring down her son's fever. Beyond the shuttered window, the riders waited in the rain. Elias watched them from the darkness and noticed that none wore a sheriff's badge. They had not come to arrest a fugitive. They had come to recover something Silas Whitmore could not afford to let Clara keep. Elias allowed Clara and Sam to remain at Blackwood Ranch for 3 days. He made no promise beyond that. The boy needed rest. The rain had washed out the eastern road, and no decent man would send a sick child into the dark. Clara understood the limits of his kindness. Before sunrise, she folded the borrowed blankets, cleaned the mud from the floor, and lit the stove without waking anyone. The room they had slept in had belonged to Elias's younger brother. Nothing had been moved since the winter he died. A worn coat still hung behind the door, and a small wooden horse rested on the shelf. Clara noticed the dust had been cleared from every object except those two. She said nothing. Grief, she had learned, often survived by being left undisturbed. Elias found her in the kitchen dividing a piece of bread. She wrapped the larger half in cloth and slipped it into her pocket. For a moment, suspicion crossed his face. Then Sam entered, pale and unsteady, and Clara gave him the hidden portion. The next morning, Elias left 2 eggs beside the breadbasket. He never mentioned what he had seen. Clara worked carefully. She washed dishes, repaired torn grain sacks, and sorted the pantry so nothing spoiled. She did not behave like a guest. She behaved like someone determined to repay every hour of safety. Vernon Pike arrived before noon. He had managed Blackwood Ranch for 7 years and carried himself like a man who believed the land answered to him. His eyes remained on Clara longer than courtesy allowed. He warned Elias that Silas Whitmore had influence in Mercy Creek and that sheltering an accused thief could damage the ranch's name. Elias did not raise his voice. He simply refused to condemn a woman without evidence. Vernon left the kitchen with his jaw tight. Later, Sam wandered toward the barn while Clara hung wet clothing near the stove. A chestnut mare, inside the second stall, was pawing the ground and turning toward her belly. The stable hand assumed the animal was restless after the storm, but Clara recognized the early signs of colic. Her father had lost 2 horses to the same condition when she was young. She had the grain removed, kept the mare walking, and stopped the stable hand from giving too much water at once. Elias returned from the north pasture to find Clara leading the sweating animal in slow circles, while Sam watched from the doorway. By evening, the mare had settled. No one praised Clara loudly. The ranch hands merely began looking at her differently. Elias asked how she had known what to do, and she explained only that she had grown up around horses. That answer was true, though it was not complete. The following morning, Clara carried a stack of clean cloths into Elias's office. A ledger lay open on the desk. She had no intention of reading it, but one line caught her attention. The ranch had purchased enough winter feed for nearly twice the number of cattle currently grazing the Blackwood. She looked again. 3 payments had been made to different suppliers on the same day. The amounts were nearly identical. The handwriting was not. The numbers should have meant nothing to a woman Vernon had already dismissed as a burden. Instead, they told Clara that someone inside Blackwood Ranch had been stealing from Elias for months. Clara did not touch the ledger again until Elias entered the office. She stood beside the desk with her hands folded and asked why Blackwood Ranch had paid twice for winter feed when the herd was smaller than it had been the year before. Elias looked at the open page, then at her. Most people needed several minutes to understand his account. Clara had noticed the problem in a single glance. She explained that her father had taught her to keep ranch books when she was 12. He believed numbers were another kind of trail. A missing dollar left tracks just as clearly as a stolen horse. After his death, her uncles had sold the family ranch because they claimed a woman could not understand land, contracts, or cattle prices. Clara had learned not to tell men what she knew until they gave her a reason to trust them. Elias pulled out the previous month's records and placed them beside the current ledger. Clara studied the entries without sitting in his chair. 3 suppliers had billed the ranch on the same day. The company names were different, but the spacing, ink pressure, and shape of the numbers were almost identical. One man had likely written all 3 invoices. Another payment had been made for repairs to the northern well. Elias knew the well had been dry since his father's time. No crew had worked there in years. Before Clara could explain what that meant, Vernon appeared in the doorway. His expression changed when he saw the ledger spread across the desk. He asked why a wanted widow was being allowed to inspect private ranch records. He reminded Elias that Silas Whitmore had accused her of stealing legal documents. Clara stepped back. She expected Elias to close the books and send her away. Instead, he asked Vernon for the original receipts. Vernon claimed they were stored in the supply shed. He promised to bring them later, then left too quickly for a man with nothing to hide. Elias told Clara to write down every irregularity she found. He did not tell her she was right. He also did not dismiss her because she was a woman. That night, the wind carried the sound of a horse across the yard. Clara woke before the second hoofbeat. She pulled the sealed envelope from beneath her pillow and hid it under a loose floorboard. Sam sat upright, his face pale in the darkness. "Are we safe now, Mama?" Clara held him and listened for footsteps. She wanted to promise him they were safe, but she had made too many promises that powerful men had been able to break. Outside the room, Elias heard the question. He did not enter. He placed a chair in the hallway, sat with his rifle resting against the wall, and remained there until dawn. When Clara opened the door, he was asleep with his hat tipped over his eyes. He had guarded them without forcing her to explain her fear. That morning, Clara gave him the envelope Daniel had left behind. Inside was a single page. Daniel had written that if he died before reaching Mercy Creek, Clara must find Elias Blackwood. Elias's father had known the truth about the northern land and the water beneath it. Daniel warned that Silas would destroy both families before allowing that truth to become public. The letter ended in the middle of a sentence. A second page had been torn away. Elias turned the envelope toward the window. The black wax bore the small pine and star mark his father had once used on private agreements. No one outside the Blackwood family should have possessed that seal. Clara reached into her dress and touched the hidden deed, but did not remove it. She still did not know whether the paper would save her son or give another man the power to control them. Elias folded Daniel's letter carefully. He did not demand the rest of her secret. He said only that someone had gone to great trouble to keep the missing page from reaching him. Across the yard, Vernon watched through the office window. For the first time since Clara arrived, fear replaced contempt in his eye. If you believe Clara is hiding the truth to protect someone rather than deceive Elias, share your thoughts in the comments. Before sunset, Elias searched an old box of his father's papers. At the bottom, he found a faded map of the northern boundary. One corner had been cut away. It was the exact size of the missing page. Elias gave Clara 1 week to examine the ranch account. He placed every ledger, receipt, cattle tally, and payroll sheet on the office table, then told Vernon that no document was to leave the house. Clara began with the herd count. Blackwood Ranch had purchased feed for more than 800 cattle, but the latest range tally listed fewer than 670. Vernon's records claimed 32 animals had died during storm. Yet no hides had been logged, no burial crews had been paid, and no loss had been reported to the Livestock Association. Dead cattle did not simply vanish. Clara searched the freight slips and found the missing numbers hidden beneath altered ink. The animals had been transported in small groups to a holding ranch west of Mercy Creek. Each shipment was listed under a different owner, but the brands matched Blackwood stock. Elias read the numbers twice. Vernon had not lost the cattle. He had sold them. Clara then compared the feed invoices. 3 companies with different names used the same mailing address. Payments had passed through a trading office partly owned by Elias Whitmore. The theft was larger than a dishonest manager taking extra money. Vernon had been weakening Blackwood Ranch from the inside while Silas profited from every loss. Clara advised Elias to lock the original ledgers in the iron strongbox and create a second inventory in the presence of trusted ranch hands. She also asked him to stop buying feed through Vernon's suppliers until their identities could be verified. Elias followed her recommendations without pretending the ideas were his. Over the next 2 days, every steer was counted, each brand recorded, and every sack in the storehouse measured. The ranch stopped paying false invoices. Enough money remained to cover the workers' delayed wages. The men who had first seen Clara as another hungry mouth watched her hand Elias the payroll figure. For the first time in several weeks, each worker received the full amount he had earned. Respect came quietly after that. No one called her a burden again. But the missing cattle did not explain why Blackwood Ranch was losing water. Clara studied the old northern map Elias had found among his father's papers. A narrow blue line once ran from Whitmore land through a rocky basin and into the Blackwood grazing field. The line ended near the abandoned well Vernon claimed had been repaired. Clara asked Elias to take her north. They rode before sunrise, leaving Sam with the cook. Frost covered the grass, and the basin lay silent beneath a pale sky. Near the old boundary, Clara found fresh wagon marks crossing ground no ranch crew had reason. Farther ahead, part of the fence had been cut and repaired with newer wire. Elias dismounted. Beneath a layer of brush, they discovered wooden piping recently buried in the soil. It led toward a crude dam built between two rock walls. Water that should have crossed Blackwood land had been diverted west toward property controlled by Silas. Clara knelt near the damp earth and traced the direction of the pipe with her fingers. The false well repairs had paid for this. Silas was using Blackwood money to steal Blackwood water. Without the northern flow, the pastures would fail before spring. Elias would be forced to sell cattle at a loss, miss the bank payment, and surrender the ranch at auction. Silas would then purchase the land cheaply and control both sides of the water route. The plan had not begun when Clara arrived. It had been unfolding for years. Elias looked across the dry basin and understood that his ranch had not been dying from bad weather alone. Someone had carefully arranged each failure. Clara proposed selling a small portion of the herd before winter prices fell. The money could buy time while they documented the theft. She also recommended moving the weakest cattle closer to the remaining water and keeping separate copies of every account. Elias agreed. Within days, waste declined, the herd was stabilized, and the ranch's losses slowed. Clara had not saved Blackwood Ranch yet, but she had stopped the bleeding. Vernon watched the changes with growing unease. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, he entered the supply shed and removed a folded message from inside his coat. He rode to the telegraph office before dawn and paid the operator not to record his name. The message contained only 5 words. The widow has the map. Each morning, Elias left a cup of coffee beside the ledgers before Clara entered the office. He never said it was for her. She never thanked him aloud. She simply drank it while the steam still rose, then washed the cup and returned it to the same place before he came back from the pasture. The small ritual became part of Blackwood Ranch. Clara worked at the kitchen table after supper, checking figures beneath the yellow light of an oil lamp. Elias often repaired tack nearby. They spoke only when necessary, yet the silence no longer felt empty. It felt like a room neither of them had to defend. One evening, Clara noticed that the lining of Elias's winter coat had torn beneath the shoulder. The wool was worn thin, and several old repairs had begun to open. She mended it after he went to the barn, matching the original stitches so carefully that he might not notice. He noticed. The next morning, Elias put on the coat, ran his thumb over the repaired seam, and looked toward Clara. He said nothing, but he left a second piece of sugar beside her coffee. Sam had begun following Elias at a cautious distance. The boy watched him carry feed, mend gates, and calm nervous horses. Elias never called him closer. He allowed Sam to decide how near he wished to stand. A small gray pony named Button became the bridge between them. Elias first taught Sam to hold out a flat hand. Then he showed him how to touch the pony's neck without making sudden movement. For several days, Sam did no more than brush the animal while Elias held the lead rope. When Elias finally lifted him into the saddle, Sam gripped the horn with both hands. Elias walked beside him for one slow circle around the corral. Clara watched from the barn doorway, her hands pressed together beneath her shawl. She had not seen her son trust a man since Daniel died. When Sam looked back at her with a frightened smile, she smiled in return. It was the first time Elias had seen her do so. The expression changed her face so completely that he had to look away. Later that week, Elias cut his palm while tightening wire along the southern fence. He returned to the house with blood running over his wrist. Clara brought warm water, clean cloth, and a strip of linen. He sat at the kitchen table while she washed the wound. Her hands were steady until Elias moved too quickly. Clara flinched and released him at once. She seemed ashamed of the reaction. Elias did not reach for her. He rested his injured hand on the table and waited. Only when Clara chose to take it again did he allow her to finish the battle. That night, rain swept over the ranch. Thunder rolled against the mountains, and Clara stood awake near the barn doors, listening for riders that were not there. Elias found her but remained several steps away. He did not tell her she was safe, as though his words could erase the past. He did not ask what Silas had done to make every hoofbeat sound like a threat. He simply stayed beside her while the rain struck the roof. After a long silence, Clara admitted that she had forgotten what it felt like to be spoken to gently. Elias looked toward the dark stalls. Kindness was not a debt, he told her. It was something people should have received before the world taught them to live without it. Clara did not answer, but the fear in her shoulders slowly eased. The following afternoon, Sam held a lump of sugar beneath Button's nose. The pony's rough tongue swept across his palm, and the boy burst into laughter. The sound traveled through the barn and into the yard. Several ranch hands stopped working. Blackwood Ranch had carried silence for so many years that the laughter seemed almost unfamiliar. Elias stood near the gate, watching Sam and Clara together, and realized the house no longer felt like a place he merely returned to after work. It felt occupied, alive. That realization brought more fear than comfort. Clara's 3 promised days had already become 2 weeks. Elias wanted her and Sam to remain, but he refused to turn shelter into obligation. He would not use danger, poverty, or gratitude to hold her at Blackwood Ranch. Before he could decide what to say, a rider from Mercy Creek arrived with a leather dispatch case. The letter inside bore the bank's official seal. Blackwood Ranch had failed to meet payments on loans Elias had never knowingly signed. Unless the full balance was paid, the land, buildings, and remaining cattle would be sold at public auction in 10 days. Clara read the notice twice. At the bottom was the name of the man who had already offered to purchase the ranch. Silas Whitmore. The first snow had not yet fallen, but the sky over Blackwood Ranch carried the color of iron when Silas Whitmore arrived. He did not come alone. A lawyer rode beside him. Vernon Pike followed on a dark horse, and a deputy from Mercy Creek carried a leather folder beneath his coat. 2 hired men waited farther back, close enough to be seen but far enough to pretend they were not part of the threat. Clara recognized Silas before he reached the gate. For one terrible moment, she was standing outside the Whitmore house again, listening as men decided what she could keep, where she could go, and whether she was fit to raise her own child. Sam moved behind her skirt. Elias stepped between them and the gate. Silas removed his gloves, with the calm manner of a man entering a business meeting. He claimed he had come to correct an unfortunate misunderstanding. According to the papers in his lawyer's hands, Clara had stolen property from the Whitmore estate and fled before the family could recover it. The deputy produced an order demanding the return of all deeds, letters, maps, and financial records Clara had taken from Daniel's home. The second document was worse. It granted temporary custody of Sam to Silas until a court could decide whether Clara was capable of caring for him. The petition described her as homeless, unstable, and wanted for theft. Silas spoke of the boy as though he were concerned for him, yet his eyes never settled on Sam. They remained fixed on Clara's dress, the ranch house, and the office window where the ledgers were kept. Clara understood then that the custody order had never been about protecting herself. Silas wanted control of Daniel's heir. Vernon opened a second ledger and claimed Clara had altered Blackwood accounts after Elias allowed her into the office. Several transfers appeared beneath her name. The pages carried signatures resembling Elias's, along with notes suggesting Clara had used stolen ranch money to finance her escape. A few of the ranch hands exchanged uneasy looks. The evidence had been prepared carefully. To anyone who had not watched Clara rebuild the accounts line by line, the accusation seemed possible. Silas offered Elias a way out. If he surrendered Clara, Sam, the deed, and every document Daniel had left, Silas would purchase Blackwood Ranch before the auction. He would settle the bank's claim and allow Elias to remain as foreman. The offer was designed to sound generous. In truth, it would give Silas the land, the water, the child, and the only woman capable of proving what he had done. Clara looked toward the barn, the house, and the men whose wages had only recently been restored. She could not bear the thought that Elias might lose everything because he had opened his door to her. She stepped forward. Elias moved his arm across the gate before she could pass. He did not order her back. He reminded her that a choice made while someone threatened her son was not a free choice. Then he asked to see the custody order. The deputy hesitated before handing it over. Elias read the date twice. The petition had been filed 4 days before Silas publicly accused Clara of theft. The court had supposedly declared her dangerous before any complaint had been recorded. Clara examined the seal. The ink was fresh, but the clerk named at the bottom had retired the previous spring. The lawyer tried to take the document back. Elias kept his voice low. No one would cross the gate until Sheriff Nathan Cole personally confirmed the order. No document would leave Blackwood Ranch, and Sam would not be taken from his mother on the strength of papers that contradicted their own date. The deputy looked towards Silas instead of defending the warrant. That single glance told Elias whose authority the man truly served. Vernon accused him of sacrificing the ranch for a thief. Silas warned that the auction would proceed in 10 days and that the bank would not care about sentiment. Elias stood with one hand resting on the gate. He had spent years losing people in silence. He would not save his land by delivering a frightened woman back to the men hunting. If you came for trouble, you found it. If you came for her, you'll leave disappointed. No one reached for a weapon. The strength of the moment came from the fact that Elias did not need one. Behind him, Clara felt something inside her change. Elias was not protecting her because he believed she was helpless. He was protecting her right to decide what happened next. If every official paper seemed to condemn Clara, would you still believe the woman whose actions had already saved the ranch? Share your thoughts in the comments, and pass this story to someone who believes power should never matter more than truth. Silas replaced his gloves and mounted his horse. Before turning away, he promised that Blackwood Ranch would belong to him when the auction hammer fell. Sam would be returned to the Whitmore family, and Mercy Creek would remember Clara only as a thief who had deceived a lonely rancher. The riders disappeared down the road. Vernon went with them. Elias watched until the last horse vanished beyond the ridge. Then he opened the false ledger again and found a transfer dated the day before Clara had ever reached Blackwood Ranch. Silas had made one mistake. He had accused her of stealing money before she was there to steal it. Elias did not chase Silas down the road. He did not reach for a rifle, call the ranch hands to mount, or answer a threat with another threat. Anger might have given him a few minutes of satisfaction, but it would not stop the auction or prove Clara innocent. Instead, he locked the office. Every original ledger, receipt, cattle tally, and bank notice went into the iron strongbox. 2 trusted hands counted the remaining livestock again, while another rode to Mercy Creek with a message for Sheriff Nathan Cole. Clara watched Elias prepare the evidence with the patience of a man repairing a fence before a storm. He did not promise that everything would be all right. He simply made certain Silas would not be able to erase what they had already found. When the last ledger had been secured, Clara asked Elias to close the office. Her hands trembled as she loosened the stitching inside her dress. From beneath the lining, she removed a folded sheet wrapped in oilcloth. It was the deed Daniel had given her before his final ride. The paper named Daniel Whitmore as owner of the Northern Tract. Beneath his name, a clause transferred the property to Samuel Whitmore in the event of Daniel's death. Silas had never been the legal heir. Sam was. Clara placed the deed on the desk, but kept one hand over it. She admitted that she had hidden it from Elias because every man who learned it existed had tried to decide what should happen to her and her son. She had feared Elias might protect them only until the paper became useful to him. Elias did not reach for the deed. He stepped away from the desk and told Clara that the choice belonged to her. She could keep the document, show it to the sheriff, or burn it in the stove. He would not take it from her hand. For the first time since Daniel's death, Clara held something powerful without a man demanding control of it. She wrapped the deed again and placed it in her own satchel. Then she said she was ready to show it to the law. Sheriff Nathan Cole met them in Mercy Creek that afternoon. He was an older man with tired eyes and none of the polished confidence Silas purchased in others. After reading the false custody order, he admitted the deputy had acted without proper authority. The retired clerk named on the document had not issued any order. Nathan agreed to protect Sam until a judge could examine the case. Clara next showed him the bank papers bearing Elias's signature. She compared the letters with an old cattle contract and found the same unusual break in the capital. Whoever forged the loan had copied the signature directly from that document. Elias remembered signing the cattle contract 6 years earlier. Vernon had stored the original. The discovery linked the false loan to a man inside Blackwood Ranch, but they still needed proof that Silas had ordered the fraud. Nathan searched the county files for records concerning the northern boundary. He found several references to a dispute between Elias's father and the Whitmore family, but the final settlement was missing. Elias remembered a stone marker in the northern canyon. His father had forbidden the ranch hands from moving it, even after the fence line changed. They rode there before sunset. The marker stood among cedar roots and broken rock. Time had softened its edges, but two symbols remained visible on its face. One was the Blackwood pine and star. The other was the Whitmore circle crossed by a river line. Clara examined the ground around it. Recent rain had loosened the soil along one side. Elias used a shovel to clear the base, uncovering a flat iron plate. Beneath it lay a narrow metal box wrapped in rotting canvas. Inside was the missing page of Daniel's letter. There was also a survey map signed by Elias's father and Daniel's father nearly 20 years earlier. Daniel's final page explained that Silas had discovered the old water agreement and planned to destroy it. The agreement prevented either family from blocking the spring or selling exclusive control to an outside buyer. Daniel had also written that the loans against Blackwood Ranch were false. He believed Silas and Vernon were creating debt, diverting water, and stealing cattle until Elias had no choice but to sell. Daniel had hidden the evidence beneath the marker after realizing someone was following him. He died 2 days later. Clara lowered the letter. The page did not prove Silas had killed Daniel, but it proved Daniel had feared him and had uncovered the scheme before his death. Elias unfolded the survey map across the stone. The blue water line passed through Whitmore land, crossed the northern tract now belonging to Sam, and continued into Blackwood pasture. A note beside the line granted both families permanent access. Silas could not legally own or control the water alone. Clara looked toward the dry basin below. The deed in her satchel gave Sam the land. The survey gave Blackwood Ranch the water. The ledgers showed who had stolen the money used to divert it. The separate pieces were beginning to form one truth. But the auction was only 8 days away. And unless they could find the original county record, Silas would claim the map was nothing more than an old family drawing. Clara spread the deed, survey map, false loan papers, and ranch ledgers across Sheriff Nathan Cole's desk. For the first time, the evidence did not look like separate pieces of trouble. It formed a path. The deed proved that Samuel Whitmore owned the northern tract after Daniel's death. The survey map proved that Blackwood Ranch held permanent rights to the spring crossing that land. The ledgers proved that money had been taken from Elias's ranch and sent through companies linked to Silas. The false repair bills showed how that stolen money had paid for the dam and buried pipes that diverted the water. But old family documents could still be challenged. Clara knew Silas would call them incomplete, forged, or misunderstood unless they found an official record. She began again with the loan papers. The largest note claimed Elias had signed it before a Mercy Creek clerk on October 14. Clara asked where he had been that day. Elias remembered the date because a blizzard had trapped his cattle drive near Red Hollow. He had spent 3 nights at a boarding house, more than 200 miles from Mercy Creek. Nathan sent a deputy he trusted to search the church register and lodging records. By evening, they had 2 written entries. One placed Elias at Red Hollow on the day the loan was signed. The other showed he had attended Sunday service there the following morning. He could not have appeared before a Mercy Creek clerk. The signature was false. Clara then compared the banknote with the cattle contract Vernon had stored years earlier. Every hesitation, ink break, and crooked line matched. The forger had copied Elias's name rather than written it naturally. Nathan agreed that the bank debt could be challenged. Yet, the water agreement still needed official proof. Sam sat quietly near the stove while the adults searched through Daniel's remaining papers. He turned Clara's wedding ring between his fingers. She had bought it back with her first wages from Blackwood Ranch, not because she believed it could restore the life she had lost, but because Daniel had died trying to leave her something true. Sam traced the worn metal and said his father had once told him that the ring carried the number of a place where lies could not follow. Clara took it from him. Inside the band, beneath years of scratches, she found 3 tiny marks she had always mistaken for damage. A letter. 2 numbers. Another letter. Nathan recognized the format used in the old county archive. They hurried to the storage room beneath the Mercy Creek courthouse. Dust-covered shelves packed with tax books, survey claims, water permits, and property disputes no one had opened in decades. The code led them to a narrow drawer marked B17W. Inside was an official copy of the water agreement between the Blackwood and Whitmore families. Both fathers had signed it. A county surveyor had witnessed it. The agreement granted Blackwood Ranch permanent access to the northern spring and prohibited either family from blocking, selling, or redirecting the water without the other family's consent. Silas had no authority to build the dam. He had stolen the water as surely as Vernon had stolen the cattle. A second file revealed that the company receiving Blackwood's false repair payments had been registered by Silas's lawyer 6 months before Daniel died. The dates proved the scheme had begun long before Clara arrived at the. Then a freight driver named Amos Reed came to the sheriff's office. He had heard that Vernon was no longer protected by Elias. Amos admitted he had hauled cattle at night under Vernon's orders. Vernon paid him in cash and instructed him to list the animals under different brands. Amos still had one delivery receipt. The cattle numbers matched Clara's inventory. Nathan placed the receipt beside the forged loan and the water agreement. The case no longer depended on Clara's word against Silas's. It depended on records, dates, brands, witnesses, and money. Clara had built the chain herself. The sheriff warned them that the auction could still begin before the bank formally reviewed the evidence. Silas's lawyer would try to dismiss every document in public and accuse Clara of creating the entire story to save herself. Elias asked whether she wanted to remain at the ranch while Nathan handled the matter. Clara looked at Sam, then at the deed Daniel had died protecting. She had spent months running because Silas owned the loudest voice in every room. This time, she would stand where the whole town could hear hers. She gathered the papers, wrapped the original deed in oilcloth, and placed it inside her satchel. They rode toward Mercy Creek before sunrise on the morning of the auction. When the courthouse bell came into view, it had already begun to ring. Inside the town hall, the auctioneer raised his hammer over Blackwood Ranch. The auction room at Mercy Creek Town Hall was already full when Clara entered. Ranchers lined the walls, merchants crowded the benches, and Elias Whitmore sat beside the bank representative with Vernon Pike nearby. At the center of the room, the auctioneer raised his hammer over Blackwood Ranch. Silas smiled when he saw Clara. He stood and announced that the accused thief had arrived with more forged papers. Whispers spread through the hall, but Clara did not lower her head. She walked to the front table, placed her satchel beside the auction ledger, and asked the bank to delay the sale long enough to examine evidence of fraud. Silas objected, and the auctioneer began to lower the hammer. Sheriff Nathan Cole ordered him to stop. He announced that the debt against Blackwood Ranch was under investigation for forgery, theft, and unlawful transfer of property. Until the evidence had been examined, the ranch could not be sold honestly. Clara opened the first ledger. She did not begin with her suffering or Daniel's death. She began with numbers. Blackwood Ranch had paid 3 feed companies on the same dates for nearly identical amounts. All 3 companies shared one address connected to a trading office, partly controlled by Silas. Next, Clara produced the cattle record. 32 Blackwood animals had been listed as dead, yet their brand numbers appeared on freight receipts from a ranch west of Mercy Creek. Amos Reed stepped forward and admitted he had transported the cattle at night under Vernon's order. He still carried one receipt. The numbers matched Clara's inventory. Vernon denied everything, but Clara showed cash withdrawals made on the same nights as the shipment. Each one carried his initials. Silas claimed Vernon's theft had nothing to do with the auction. Clara placed the loan papers on the table. The largest note claimed Elias had signed it in Mercy Creek on October 14. Nathan presented a boarding house register and church record proving Elias had been more than 200 miles away that day. Clara then placed an old cattle contract beside the loan. The false signature had been copied. Every broken stroke matched. The bank representative compared the pages and stopped defending the debt. Silas's lawyer demanded proof connecting his client to the scheme. Clara produced the company registration from the county archive. The company receiving Blackwood's false repair payments had been created through Silas's lawyer. The money had purchased timber, iron fittings, and pipe. Those materials had not repaired a well. They had built the dam that diverted Blackwood water. Clara unfolded the official water agreement. It granted both the Blackwood and Whitmore families permanent access to the northern spring. Neither family could block or redirect it without the other's consent. Then she placed Daniel's deed beside it. The northern land had passed legally to Sam after Daniel's death. Silas had no right to the land, the water, or the child. For the first time, his calm disappeared. He accused Clara of manipulating Daniel and inventing the entire story. Clara did not ask the town to believe her. She asked the county clerk to read the deed. The clerk confirmed Daniel's signature, the witness marks, and the transfer to Samuel Whitmore. Nathan then displayed the custody. It had been dated before Clara was accused and signed in the name of a clerk who had already retired. The room turned against Silas. Vernon tried to reach the side door, but Nathan stopped him. Faced with the receipts, false invoices, copied signature, and company records, Vernon confessed. Silas had promised him part of Blackwood Ranch after the auction. Vernon had altered the books, sold cattle, and helped redirect the water. He also admitted that Daniel had discovered the scheme before his death. Nathan announced that Daniel's fatal accident would be reopened for investigation. Vernon and Silas were arrested for theft, fraud, forgery, conspiracy, unlawful diversion of water, and the false custody petition. The deputy who carried the order was suspended. The bank withdrew the auction and froze the disputed debt. Blackwood Ranch was saved. No gunfight decided the outcome. Clara had won through records, dates, witnesses, and the courage to speak when silence would have been safer. Elias stood before the town and said the ranch survived because Clara had seen theft where everyone else saw failure. She had found the stolen cattle, exposed the false debt, restored the water rights, and protected every worker whose wages depended on the ranch. He had opened a door for one hunted widow. She had saved everything behind it. The townspeople made space as Clara walked past them with Sam. Some lowered their eyes. Others offered apologies that could not erase what they had done. Clara left the hall with her name restored. If this moment of justice moved you, share the story, save the video, and subscribe for more stories about courage, healing, and second chances. That evening, Elias returned to the ranch, expecting to find Clara beside the ledgers. Instead, he found the old valise open on her bed. Her dresses were already folded inside. By sunrise, the dam in the northern canyon had been opened. Water returned to the old channel, darkening the dry earth before spreading across Blackwood pasture. The ranch still carried honest debt, winter was near, and much of the stolen money might never be recovered. But the land had a future again. Inside the house, Clara left a 3-year recovery plan beside the coffee pot. It showed how many cattle the ranch could support, which fences needed repair, and how every lawful debt could be paid without selling the northern fields. Elias found the figures. Then he noticed her chair was empty. Upstairs, the old valise lay open on the bed. Clara had folded her dresses, Sam's clothes, and the blanket they had carried through the rain. The restored deed rested inside her satchel. She had arrived with almost nothing. Now she was preparing to leave with her name, land, and freedom returned. Elias stood in the doorway but did not block it. Clara explained that the northern tract belonged to Sam. A small cabin stood near the spring, and she could repair it. She would help with the ranch books until Elias found someone else. She did not want gratitude to become another chain. Elias placed 2 sets of papers on the bed. The first confirmed Clara and Sam's ownership of the northern land. The second offered Clara the position of financial manager at Blackwood Ranch, with wages, a share of future profits, and authority over the accounts. Her name appeared beside Elias's, not beneath it. He told her she could live at the ranch, move to the cabin, or leave entirely. The choice was hers. Then he admitted he did not want her to stay because she needed shelter. He wanted her to stay because the house had grown warmer when she entered it, because Sam's laughter had brought life back to the barn, and because Clara made him imagine a future instead of merely surviving another season. Clara remembered the kitchen where Sam's fever had broken, the hallway where Elias had guarded them without demanding her secrets, and the barn where he had stayed beside her during the storm without touching her until she felt safe. For most of her life, others had decided what she could own and where she belonged. Elias was offering a choice. Sam ran into the room with mud on his boots and asked whether Button could live on their land when they moved. Elias knelt and told him the pony could stay wherever Sam called home. The boy looked at the packed valise. "Can we stay with you, Pa?" The words settled over the room more gently than any promise. Elias lowered his head. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. He straightened Sam's collar and said the boy could stay as long as he would. Clara closed the valise. Not because she was leaving, because she no longer needed to keep it ready. She signed the agreement at the kitchen table. Later, she and Elias walked beside the northern pasture, while Sam rode Button between them. Water shone beneath the morning light, joining the lands and futures of both families. Elias offered no grand promise. He offered honesty, partnership, and a place beside him. Clara took his hand because she was free to do so. "It became home the night you opened the door," she said. "I was only too frightened to know it." Behind them stood a ranch saved by a woman the town had called worthless. Ahead waited work, winter, and a life they would build slowly. Inside the Blackwood house, three people who had once believed they were alone had finally become a family. Finally become a family. Finally become a family. Finally become a family. Finally become a family.